It is, we talked about heaven, paradise. What about hell? It is said that لها سبعة أبواب and وقودها الناس والحجارة وإن منكم إلا واردها, and with different names, الحطمة, الهاوية, سقر, and all these things. I mentioned the question, please.
In fact, I also mentioned hell without naming it, because I mentioned the basic principle of transfer of only waves or pulses or watch to the brain, and they tell us what is pleasurable and also what is most punishing and hurting. And sometimes the same thing can be pleasurable for one and punishing for the other. That is why in English they say one man's poison is another man's meat. Right? So one man's meat is another man's poison, either way it could be. So that is why we decide here. There the food will not change, it will be the same. Let's imagine one situation. And that if the source of pleasure is one, and it is poison for us while we have trained ourselves in a way that it is poisonous for us, then it will not provide us any pleasure at all. You know, things which sometimes you taste and throw out, it is so punishing. An animal goes and picks it up and enjoys. So that is one way of thinking. I mean, this is just a projection of possible, projection into the possible things, and I'm going to develop it further. Now, one thing remember, they will be those who are hell-bound. They will not be provided anything for which they had developed taste here, because that would be forbidden in the hereafter. All the false things to which they were attached will be removed from them. That is one form of hell. If you desire something, if you get it, this is heaven. If you do not get it, the counter is hell in fact. If you are deprived of everything you love, everything you want, this is the greatest punishment that can happen to you. But also remember, in this world we know that some follies of ours, some desires unfulfilled, take a form of fire. And that fire which you feel here actually is mentioned as fire. I can quote one example of a man who was at that time, now there are so many rich people in Pakistan. There's just a few, and he was among the most, the richest person in Pakistan. He met an Ahmadi in a party. I never met him myself, but he met an Ahmadi who also was a businessman of some order, and they were blood relations as well. This man was Ahmadi, he was not an Ahmadi. So in a grand party he had thrown where more than 1,000 people were invited, you know, all the big people, everybody who was worth anything in Pakistan, he attended his party. And he went to say, congratulations, you have done a great thing and you must be very happy. Suddenly he said, happy? What do you mean happy? He opened his buttons like this. If you could peep in, there is a raging fire. I'm the most unhappy man on earth. He was the richest. So, these were the very words he described his feeling here. So, because these feeling of punishment which man sometimes receives here in this earth is described as fire. You see a cancer patient dying sometimes, he describes what he is suffering. It's a burning fire, well, there is no fire. So if these feelings are exaggerated out of all proportion in the life to come, then like the pleasure will be exaggerated and it will be could not be compared with the pleasures here. So that hellfire would take a form which will begin to burn the person far more vigorously and with such violence as he had no experience before. And because it will be spiritual, so there will be no burning of anything. Burning in the sense that one becomes accustomed. Spiritual fires, as long as they rage, they continue to hurt and they do not create any defense against themselves. If you remember any moment in your life where you made a mistake and you began to suffer, until God made you, forget things because of the healing time and this and that, that memory sometimes continues to burn. And if it's a really big loss, you will see women who have lost their children, loved ones, they continues to pine away and they can never forget.
For years and years.
Yes. So this is the meaning of juludun. If something happens temporarily, people come and apparently, a scar is created, but then the same thing is happening. Now, same thing happens again and again and again. I quote you a real example from the history of Britain. It is said, in those days, people of Scotland who tried to, throw the yoke of the British and get liberated from their control or their rule, many a time staged protests and came to the streets, but they were very heavily punished. And sometimes they were turned out of the country, packed in some ships and sent to Australia. Now, Australia, as we know today, is a big country, is a continent. It is mostly made of the criminals who were sent from England to occupy an island that far, never to return here. You see, that was the philosophy of this. In how little that people of that time know that they are offering them a great continent and they will give birth to generations which will be proud of being the masters of this continent. But at that time, it was just a punishment. A woman, it is reported in history, had one son who was young and who was arrested in one of the riots and sent out to Australia, packed in a ship. Now this woman became mad, day in and day out. That was the only thing she did. She got ready, prepared herself, that my son is about to return now. Until she died, this was the unchangeable routine. So the spiritual suffering is not a small thing. And if this suffering is exaggerated and the birds are made far more sensitive, that is hell, raging fire. So raging fire for a spirit has to be a spiritual raging fire. Right?
Yes, sir.
The Holy Quran also has left hints for us, sort of keys with which we can open up these locks. But if we understand, then we'll find them. There is one small surah at the end of the Holy Quran, which speaks of this phenomenon of something which will be hell for the hearts. So this can be translated in two different ways. If you translate it literally, then it is a grand prophecy for the creation of atomic bomb. If you translate it spiritually, then it describes the spiritual hell. So now I recite, وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ الَّذِي جَمَعَ مَالًا وَعَدَّدَهُ يَحْسَبُ أَنَّ مَالَهُ أَخْلَدَهُ كَلَّا لَيُنبَذَنَّ فِي الْحُطَمَةِ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْحُطَمَةُ نَارُ اللَّهِ الْمُوقَدَةُ الَّتِي تَطَّلِعُ عَلَى الْأَفْئِدَةِ Imagine, nar first burns the body, the clothes, the outside, the frame of the person. How can a nar reach the heart without burning and scorching the body? تَطَّلِعُ عَلَى الْأَفْئِدَةِ. So that nar God is talking about is a different nar. It's not the sort of nar to which we are used. It leaps at the hearts and destroys them, and tortures them. So there are other indications in the Holy Quran, like there are indications about Jannah, that will be spiritual. So also there are many verses of the Quran. If you read it with concentration, then you will know that they speak of a spiritual hell, not this bodily carnal hell. It doesn't burn the body outside. The cage is not mentioned. It leaps into the heart.
The target is the heart.
Without destroying the body, it leaps into the heart. That can only be spiritual fire. Now, I have mentioned that this verse, this surah, if translated in application to this world, is one of the greatest prophecies which is fulfilled in our times. If you are interested, I can tell you
Yes,
how.
please, of course.
You see, the Holy Quran speaks of وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ الَّذِي جَمَعَ مَالًا وَعَدَّدَهُ. Now, here it speaks of the great nations of the time, great powers, amassed wealth, immense wealth, and they have a quality of humazatil lumaza. They divide and rule. They let the other people fight with each other. They tell them one thing and tell the other another thing, and then they withdraw and create problems. And through these infights between the people of the third world and so on, they grow more powerful and they feed both, sell their arms and ammunition to both parties. So that is another way of amassing wealth. And you have noticed this, witnessed so many times here. Iran-Iraq war, who is the beneficiary? The rich countries. The oil was provided to them by Allah to provide them with a better way of life, for improving the quality of their life, their economy, their politics and everything about life. Now they use this oil to burn their own national interests by selling it to the rich countries, the powerful countries, who convert the oil into firepower. And the firepower is used by these people against each other. In the final analysis, it is the oil which burns them instead of providing them with good things of life. Now, these are the people described as a people. It's not an individual case now. The Holy Quran says, وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ الَّذِي جَمَعَ مَالًا وَعَدَّدَهُ كَلَّا لَيُنبَذَنَّ فِي الْحُطَمَةِ. We warn you, remember, they are going to be thrust into hutam. Now what does hutam mean? Literally, it means the smallest particle. In the beam of light, sun rays, you see some things, tiny things floating. You can't see with your naked eyes. So if you look at the Arabic dictionaries, you will be surprised to find that hutama means the smallest particle. That is atom. And the sound is so similar. H is dropped by some people, like French can't pronounce H, they would say atom. And the Arab can say hey, they would say hutam. So not only the sound is similar, but the meaning is exactly the same, the smallest particle. So how can a man, not to speak of nations, be thrust into the smallest particle? It's impossible. It means something else. And when you read on, then you understand the meaning. means you can't understand without our help what hutama means. Narullahil muqadatul lati. A fire is being prepared in that atom. Tattaliu ala lafida. I'll come to that again. Innaha alayhim mawsadatun fi amadim mumaddada. How can fire be locked in Ahmad and Muhammad. Can you imagine any way of... So now you realize what it means? Now, if you know the atomic bombs pictures, the drawings of atomic bomb just before it explodes, all the mass, radioactive mass, turns into a sort of Ahmad, and it's extended, and it pulsates, and it's like extended Ahmad, and then it bursts. The fire it releases, it is not that fire which, the heat of that fire which kills people. It is the shock wave which reaches the hearts first, much before the heat reaches it. Heat travels at a slower pace, at a slower speed, and the shock wave is the frontal wave which runs ahead. So people are dead before the heat reaches them. So the same fire kills, but by leaping at the hearts, not burning the bodies. This is the beautiful book, the Holy Quran. Turn it this way and it speaks of the hereafter, and so perfectly well. Turn it the other way and here the prophecies are being fulfilled after 1400 years or so. لا تدخل عمود فيها. The atom mass, the atomic bomb, is divided into two small portions. They cannot explode just by themselves. When they are brought together, then the explosion begins to take shape.
Remember that they are in form of Ahmad?
No.
When they approach
at
together?
that time they are not Ahmad. When they come together, then they are become Ahmad by inner pressure, outward pressure. They extend like as if they are breathing. Do this. And extend it into Ahmad. And then they burst.
No.
You see? So, in fact, it is fire, but the front waves of the fire. People were in Nagasaki, I have seen that myself. People were sitting, enjoying. They didn't even feel the heat. A shock wave came at the explosion. And suddenly, the hearts failed. And then came the heat to burn them.